Welcome to the service developer track. So for those of you who are interested or involved in service development, this is the right place to be. I'm going to be moderating this afternoon. My name is Marcus Hjortsberg. I'm based here in Stockholm. I've been working with Cisco automation products since 2014. Came into Cisco through the TLF acquisition, so I have a lot of background with the NSO product. I'm going to introduce to you Kristian Larsson, who I first met, I think maybe 2013, when he was on the customer side of things, looking to evaluate the NSO product back then. And since a few jumps over with DT and some other engagements, he's now working for Cisco, helping us improve our product. So Kristian is going to talk about observability in NSO 6.1. So welcome up on stage, Kristian.
Thank you. Hello. Oh, all right. Am I on? Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Marcus. Wow. Quite a lot of people here today. Nice to see a crowd. And it's nice. I think it's very nice to be here, right? I've never been in this venue before, but I think it's fantastic, right? Feels really good to be standing in front of you. I'm excited to be the first speaker out on the developers track, and I'm excited to bring you one of our most exciting topics, I think. I am, of course, referring to observability. We're going to run through an introduction of observability, obviously in the context of NSO, as pretty much everything we're doing here is in the context of NSO. We just put out the NSO 6.1 release. It is the second release in the NSO 6 sort of major train of releases, right? And if you haven't picked up on that yet, NSO 6 is largely about one thing, and that is concurrency, right? And this talk is about observability, so we're going to see if we can observe some concurrency. And we are going to do that through the lens of NSO 6.1, because in 6.1, one of the things that we've been spending quite a fair bit of effort on is improving observability. I'd even go so far as to say that NSO 6.1 is the biggest thing to have happened to NSO observability since forever. Ooh, shiny, right? So we're gonna cover that, and by the end of this, hopefully you'll have an idea of what observability is and the tools that we have, so that you can, the tools that are available to you at your disposal that you can use in your sort of everyday NSO life when you're doing development, debugging, troubleshooting, operations. And last but not least, you'll be so enthusiastic about all of this that you can't wait to catch the plane home and start playing with it. I don't have a lot of slides. That's pretty much it. I do have a laptop with a terminal. So I'm going to try to show you stuff instead. If you have questions, then please ask those questions to me. Do not wait till the end. Ask them right away. And I might not only be able to answer those questions, but also show you some of those things, since I have my laptop. I'm probably going to assume stuff, right? I have a blind spot, sort of. If something is not obvious, just tell me, and we'll try to clear it up, explaining that so we can all follow along. I am here for you. I'm also here the full 3 days, as well as the 2 social events today and tomorrow. So, if you want to, come talk to me about observability or other things. And last, before we start, I want to highlight, I think we have 3 other talks during this presentation that I want to draw your attention to, because they are related to observability. So we have, let's see here. Today, I think later in the operations track, there's Ulrich and Hu Cheng who's going to talk about, I think it's a little bit like stories from the trenches, right? How can you use observability data out of NSO to figure out why your system is sort of slow? We have, tomorrow, Ulrich is coming on stage again to talk about full stack monitoring. So that's practical concerns, sort of how you do monitoring of your NSO instance. And then finally, also later tomorrow, we have Simon, I don't know where he's the test lead guy. He will be talking how we make use of these tools internally for quality assurance of NSO. Right. So what is observability, right? I like to think of it something like this. You have a system, right? Perhaps it's NSO, perhaps something else. And we give some form of input to this system, right? Then the system, I mean, in the context of NSO, it might be a configuration transaction. So we're sending a bunch of configuration, right? And then we're commit, maybe over CLI, maybe over netconf. This is the input, and then we get a response. We get some result back. The NSO CLI says, commit complete, and gives you the prompt back, right? And usually, since it's NSO, we're also probably pushing some configuration down into the network onto some of the devices. But what really went on? We just sent that input, and we got some output back, right? But what was happening inside of this black box? What happened inside of NSO? And observability, I think, is the ability to sort of peek under the hood and get a sense of what the system is doing. You're probably going to find as many answers as people you ask, right? What's observability? You can start Googling this stuff. I think there are a couple of characteristics that stand out to me, right? One is that observability is being able to gain visibility into your system without bespoke debug statements, right? So I mean, if you have any program and you're like, oh, what does it do? Oh, I'll just add these print statements all over, right? And then you sort of, okay, so this is what it's doing. That's not observability, right? We want stuff that's always there. And this goes hand in hand with the second thing, which is that observability is something that is always turned on, right? We can talk about varying levels of detail that we can get out of this, but I think that it never goes to zero, right? We always have this sort of base level of data that we get out of the system that tells us roughly what the system is up to, right? So you want to be able to answer things like, someone's like, oh, last Thursday our system was really slow, or I did this and it was really, it behaved weirdly, right? And you want to be able to go back, look in your observability data and like, oh, okay, yeah, I can sort of figure out. Maybe you don't get the full detail of everything, but you can roughly nail it down to some area or something, right? So this also goes hand in hand. If it's always turned on, it has to have a low of enough performance overhead that it's, well, essentially negligible, right? We don't want to take a performance hit just because we're enabling this. And that is true for NSO. So I mean, I'll pretty much everything, I think, that I'm going to show here is it's fine. Run it in production, right? Not a problem. If I'll think of something, I'll scream and tell you that this is expensive. So don't do this in production. And last but not least, I think that observability, usually we have sort of this performance perspective on things. So it might not be that we're like, tuning this for the last bit of performance, but it's like usually we don't just want to find out what the system is doing, but roughly get an idea of also how much time it's spending on different things. There we are. Let's see. Okay. They're like reversed. Very confusing to my head. Okay, but I have one, and you can see, everyone can see that. Great. I did try this out. Okay, so we're going to look at this, right? I mean, what does this look like? This is sort of what we talked about, right? So I mean, we have an NSO instance. We're going to enter configuration mode, and in this case, we're going to create a slow service, and then we're going to do commit. And now this is precisely what I'm talking about. We're sending some input to the system, it's doing something, and then we get a little bit of output back, right? But what is it doing? Doesn't really tell us. Fortunately, with NSO, this is quite simple. The fastest way to getting more details is just to ask NSO for more details. So when you do commit or you do pretty much any other command in the CLI, you can just tack on pipe details, and you will get more details. Bam. So this is progress trace, right? Let me zoom out so we can get all of that. And this tells us a bunch of things of what was going on here, right? So this is a normal configuration transaction. So it's called applying transaction. It's the running data source. So this is configuration, right? We got the user session ID. We got the transaction ID, the trace ID. And then the rest of the stuff here, sort of, we can see the four large phases of a transaction. We got the validate phase here, ending right around here. And then we got the write start and prepare and then commit, right? And these are all individual spans, is what we call them, right? So it was creating a rollback checkpoint, and it took about 0 seconds. So that was fairly quick. And I don't know if you noticed, but let's run this thing again, right, and make it take even more time this time around. Comes instantly, and then it sort of pauses here, right? Because that's where it's spending time. So in this case, we can also get a feel for where it's spending time just by looking at this output, as the output comes in real time, right? And so obviously, the service I have here, it's a very slow service, and it's deliberately slow. It just does an actual sleep inside of the create callback. So we can see here that pretty much all the time we're spending in here, it's 4 seconds. I mean, maybe you have guessed at this point, right? That's what this argument to the service does. This has been in NSO for a very long time. I don't actually know when it was introduced, but long ago. So I think it's great for development, right? When you're developing, you know upfront that I want this output, right? I'm interested in this kind of stuff. But there's a lot of other situations. If you have a production system, you know, are you gonna like call up everyone like, you know, when you're doing CLI changes, can you just tack on pipe details? And like, if it's slow, then you know, send me an email with the output, right? That doesn't work. Or if we got changes coming in over netconf, it again doesn't work. Fortunately, we got your back. Let's see. This is gotta do unhide debug. So this. It's hidden, this configuration, but you can configure it like this, right? Progress. So don't mind the second part here about the export, but it's this first stuff first. So trace ptrace. This tells NSO write this stuff to a CSV file, right? So then we have it saved separately. So that's one way of doing it, right? And then we have it saved, right? So regardless if you're coming in over netconf, restconf, or a CLI, or the UI, or whatever, right? We will now save all the things that are going on in the system. You have different verbosity levels. Yeah, right around here is good. So this, I think it works well for, I mean, you saw this. This is a very simple transaction. There's, what, 20, 30 lines or something of output. You can easily follow that. If you have larger transactions, you have many services, many devices involved, and all of a sudden, this output is like hundreds of lines, right? Thousands of lines, and all of a sudden, it's not so easy following it on the screen like this anymore. And you know, God forbid if you were to start looking at the CSV file, right, which we are going to do right now. I just want to give you a tease sort of show. So this is what it looks like, right? And this is a slightly different format. Because here it's event focused. So the spans that we saw before, they are actually 2 events, right? A start and a stop event. So that's what this format is oriented around. So if you want to read this, you get even a little bit more work that you sort of have to do if you want to read it in a you know, presentable way. Okay. So what do we do? I mean, with all this data, right? That is where the Observability Exporter package comes in. So this is something that we've been working on for some time. I think Git init was probably in 2019 or something like that. The Observability Exporter is something, you download it, right, from Cisco Software Download. Doesn't cost you anything extra. It's like part of NSO, but you know, it's not shipped with NSO, so you just have to download it. I think you'll find the latest version under NSO 6.1. And this version, it is essentially compatible with older releases of NSO as well. But you want to make sure that you grab the latest version of the Observability Exporter. I guess there's an FXS file, but if you're handy, you can recompile it and run it on 5.8 or something as well, right? You install it as any other NSO package, drop in a package directory, and request packages reload, right? Internally, this works by grabbing the exact same data. NSO has a notification API, so it connects over the IPC port, and then it subscribes to the progress, trace, events over the notification API. By the way, I just realized, if anyone has questions and you're like raising your hand, I can't see you because the lights here are very strong, so like shout at me or something. Right, so it subscribes to these things, and then, well, what does it do? For the most part, or the main objective really, is to export the data in a industry standard format, and that is OTLP, or OpenTelemetry. And OpenTelemetry, I would say, you know, pretty much the whole industry is just converging on OpenTelemetry. We used to have like OpenSense is out of Google. We had OpenTracing, was it, out of the Linux Foundation or something like that. And these guys were like, doesn't make sense to have multiple competing tracing formats. So like, let's just join forces. And that is OpenTelemetry. So everyone is converging on that. And we just want to tap into that, right? There are many good tools out there, so we just want to export in a format where you can join that data perhaps with other data and use those tools to visualize them to work with the data. We export metrics as well as traces. Those are the two sort of main things that we export, right? Usually in observability, I mean, if you go Google this, you'll usually find someone talking about like the 3 pillars of observability, and that would be logs, traces, and metrics, right? We have lots of logs, but we don't really export them here in a uniform way. We don't do it over OpenTelemetry. The documentation for the Observability Exporter package is online. So you can, let me see actually, yeah, I do. So if you just Google NSO and Observability Exporter, I think this is the top hit. So it's fairly easy to find. Okay. Right, so I said I had one slide. I lied. I have one more. This is the only proper slide. I just wanted to quickly show sort of how this looks like, the setup. So you have NSO with that Observability Exporter package loaded, right? And what it does is export over OTLP to something called the OTLP Collector. And this is an open source free component. You can download it and run it. It's produced by the OpenTelemetry Foundation or whatever they're called. And this thing is like a Swiss Army knife of OpenTelemetry. So it can receive this data, you can filter it, you can aggregate it in different ways, and then you can re-export it to other systems. OTLP Collector, I think it is called Collector, but it's not really a collector in that sense. It doesn't store anything, right? It's not a database. So you just re-export it from there. In this case, and I'm going to show you here, I have a sort of a demo setup. We have Prometheus as a time series database, right? I got Jaeger, a tracing system. I actually have InfluxDB in here as well, another time series database, but yeah, I didn't draw that in. But you could export it to other systems as well if you have something that you prefer or you like in your environment. And then finally, so I mean, that's sort of where you store it, and then you can visualize this, right? So in Grafana, and you have Jaeger. This is the Jaeger UI, and we're going to see that in a minute. No, not in a minute. We're going to see it now. So let's do something. Let's see here. So I'm going to open up. Oh, sorry, I wanted Grafana. There we go. Nice. So let's see if I can. I'll set this to auto refresh. There's no data here, right? Because it's just showing the last 5 minutes, and we haven't really done anything with the system in the last 5 minutes. I've only been talking. So we are going to. I'm going to open up the CLI here again, and then we are going to see if we can do something. Slow service, dev days. Oops. Longest 7 seconds ever, right? So there we go, right? Ooh, nice. So that was a normal transaction. We already saw it in the CLI format right there, applying transaction, right? And now it pops up in this. So this is Grafana. This is a dashboard that we have. There are many things in here. So up here we have sort of this very overview of transactions. This is the top list over the longest. It's actually operations, not just transactions. If you do something else that's very lengthy in there, it's going to show up. More things and transaction log, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We can scroll down and we get more to devices. I didn't do anything with the device, so there's nothing popping up here right now. There's also an in-between here of transaction details. We don't have time to go through all of these things, but I hope that you'll find time yourself to look at it. And please come with questions if you have them. I'm going to focus on this, right? So longest operation. And I mean, if we, obviously, if we do more things here, I actually have this little prepared make target that I can run repeatedly. And if we do that, we're going to see more and more data popping up in the web UI, right? You can filter this in various ways. So like, oh, I'm only interested in this time period, for example, right? Then, well, you zoom in, and then, everything sort of aligns accordingly. So I mean, this top list now all of a sudden it's only over that time span that we have selected, right? So I think this is a very nice interface for that overview of your data. You're looking at your system and like, yeah, what did it do last Thursday? Was it a lot of transactions, long transactions, or what was it doing, right? And this is the perfect view into that. The second view comes when you click one of these, right? So I just clicked, you got the trace ID right here, and if you click that, we're going to be presented with the Jaeger UI. And this is the cool bits, right? Let's do this. So first of all, the trace IDs. Actually, let's do it like this, right? Let's go back here and pick the last 5 minutes. No, I don't know which one which one is which. No, let's grab this trace ID. So I can just grab that, and then in the Jaeger UI, I'll enter it up here. And unfortunately, it wants it in a slightly different format. It doesn't like the dashes in there, so I have to remove them. But once we've done that, we're presented with the visualization of this exact transaction, right? So they're connected, right? The trace ID you see in the logs inside of NSO is also what gets exported. So that's pretty handy. It means it's easy to find the stuff that you're looking for. And if you now compare these, you'll see that they're the same, right? I mean, we have in the CLI, we have this applying transaction at the top, we have the different phases, right? And then it breaks down into individual spans, and that's exactly what we have here in the trace visualization, right? So if I collapse some of these, we're going to see these are the 4 major phases that we have in the transaction, and then we can expand. Now, where it makes a big difference is, of course, we have this bar that shows time, right? This is the duration of that span. And what it does is, I mean, if we just focus on the top one first, so this is the root span in this trace, and it takes up the whole thing, right? Its duration is the entirety of this operation. And that's just the way this format works, right? So if it encompasses something, then its length is sort of encompasses that as well. So when you want to find out where we're really spending time, the way you should read this diagram is by looking at the bottom and up, right? And we find the longest one, and it's this one, and it's this nested random sleep. That's where we're spending time, okay? But I think it's very nice when you have very large transactions. Again, this is a fairly small operation, right? When it grows and you have lots more data, just looking at it like this visually helps a lot. You group it and sort of get a gut feeling for where we're spending time. Okay. So we have those 2 views, right? Grafana sort of zoomed in, Jaeger sort of zoomed. Sorry, the other way out. Grafana zoomed out. This one zoomed in. Now we also have a 4th one, which is, this is something, and shout out to Ulrik here, who actually did the first sort of proof of concept for this thing, and that we finally incorporated into the Observability Exporter. So actually, if you think of the Observability Exporter, it is not just this package, it consists of a couple of things internally. So there's a library, a Python library called ptrace, and that in turn is sort of like a Swiss Army knife of our progress trace format, so we can do various things with it. It's the core, it's the foundation of the Observability Exporter, but you can also use it standalone, and that is what I'm going to do. So I'm going to get a shell here in my NSO container, and then I've set up this nifty alias. But you can see here, so ptrace, I'm actually just going into the packages directory, and then you got the Observability Exporter package, and then inside there, there's ptrace.py. So if I run that, I get all these options. You can use it, for example, to process CSV files. So if you have a production system somewhere, you enable that ptrace CSV export, you can grab that file and process it offline, right? We're going to do something slightly different here. We're going to add the live option. So this tells NSO to, it tells ptrace to connect to a running NSO, right, over that IPC port and work with that. Then I'm going to tell it to run the span view. So the span view is a visualization that we have, and then let's run some transaction, right? That's what it looks like. And I think again, if you now Actually, where did that go? Oh, there it is. Okay, so these now, I'm not showing the same transactions here, right? But I think that overall, you can still make out the rough form. These two transactions, I think they're very similar in that we slept for roughly the same amount of time. You can make out, it's the same pattern, right? I mean, you have that applying transaction, the overarching span, it's the whole thing, right? And then you sort of break it down, right? So you can get this visualization in your terminal as well. Now, the cool thing is, it's not limited to one trace, right? We're showing just one trace right now, but we're not limited to that. And I'm going to switch now to talk about concurrency. And we'll start by doing the same thing here. This time around, we're going to filter it ever so slightly. So we add a third parameter, filter span name RE, and we're saying we're interested in create and holding transaction log. Oh, do they flip around? Yeah. Okay. So let me just see here. Okay. Yeah. So this is NSO 585, right? And that's the visualization to go along with it. And I have prepared here a little target. Test concurrent 5 that will run 5 transactions concurrently, or it will attempt to run them concurrently. And now we're seeing in real time how it's drawing these up, right? You can see we have the different trace IDs, right? So we've got 3 spans per trace, pretty much. Same trace ID, and then it gets assigned a color. These are 2 shades of green, but they're 2 different transactions. Ignore this very first gray one. That's actually deleting if there was anything in NSO to begin with. So ignore that one. We have 5 transactions, these ones, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And it's very clear, right, in NSO 5 that all of this is sequential, right? NSO grabs the transaction lock, right? It holds the transaction lock, and when it holds that, it runs create inside of it, and once it's done, it writes it to CDB and sort of releases the transaction lock, and then the next transaction can take over. So this is NSO 5. And if we now switch over and do the same thing, filter span name RE, how do I do this? Create a holding transaction lock and spell it correctly. So now we're on NSO 6, and things look quite different, right? So we have that, again, ignore this gray one, the very first one, right? That's just deleting, clearing data that's in there. So here we can see now we have the crates, right? They start immediately. We got a little bit of a staggered start there, but ignore that. That's probably just because I have a slow laptop. They're essentially starting at the same time, and we have these 4 different ones running concurrently. Now there are 5 transactions. It only runs 4 because I have 4 CPU cores in my machine. So per default, that's what it's going to do. It presumes that service code is CPU intensive, and so it runs as many as you have CPUs, right? So that's exactly what we see here, but it's running them concurrently, right? Unlike NSO 5, which ran them sequentially. Just when it's done with create, so I mean, what it's doing during create is sort of figuring out what this little delta, the change that we want to push into the database, what that looks like, and then we grab the transaction log right here, which is a very short span. Grab the transaction log, and then we just boop, put that delta into the database, and bam, we're done, right? Move on. So we can see, the holding transaction log for each trace. I mean, here we actually see the individual spans, 1 FF7, right? 1 FF7. So these are in the same trace, but the spans are in different places because they happen at different time. So just as that ends, right, then it goes into the transaction log and writes it down. And we can also see that, once that's done, so the first transaction is done, we also free up one of those slots, right? So the 5th transaction can start processing right around here. So this is what concurrency looks like in NSO 6. One of the things that's new in NSO 6, 6.0 this time, that we don't, I don't feel it's gotten very much attention, is metrics. So we now have metrics in there. I'm going to show you. Let's bring up the CLI. I mean, this is, well, this is 6.1, right? But well, we obviously have it in there. So it's fairly simple. We have show metric. The metrics are categorized into 3 categories based on use. So we got sysadmin, we got developer, and we have debug, right? Per default, sysadmin is enabled. I don't think, yeah, I guess it's not enabled. It's one of those unhide debug again, I think. Set metric, developer, mode, true, safe. And then we get a bit more. Show metric, and now we have all of them, right? So debug, counters, and we get a bunch of counters. And I mean, this one, for example, get LM, right? You can just see that increasing because pretty much any read that you do of any data is going to be a get LM, right? We have these, and I think this is very nice because it gives us, before this, all the metrics we exported are actually based on progress trace, right? But with these metrics that are native to NSO, we have an entire new sort of opportunity of much finer and low-level, you're instrumenting much more low-level code. You can't put progress trace in a hot loop somewhere, but you can potentially, put a counter there, right, or at least closer. So yeah, we have metrics in here, and with the new Observability Exporter that we've released together with 6.1, we're also exporting these metrics. So now, let me see if I can. Bring this up. We haven't incorporated these metrics into any dashboard just yet. This is still an area that we're exploring. But I would like to, encourage you, right? Go find this data. I'm able to show you because we are still exporting it. So we can just go to explore. It's in a Prometheus instance, so we can go over there, and then we can select the metric. They all start with NSO, and there's a correlation here. There's a deterministic method by which we derive the names from the Yang schema. We can explain that at some point. So here, for example, NSO CDB disk size total. Here we can see how the disk size of my NSO that I have running on my laptop, how much it's not very much, right? 8 kilobytes, I suppose, quite small. But it's there. So please, really, I encourage you to explore this, right, and understand your system through this, right? And if you'd like, come talk to me, and we can perhaps explore together. Now, last but certainly not least, NSO 6.1. We got to talk about the new shiny features. They don't come in the form of a button in this case. It's nonetheless. Let's see here. I'm actually going to bring back that shell, and we're going to go in and look at that CSV file, because I think this is where it's just easiest to explain. So what we have is a couple of new columns in the CSV output. Ooh, nice, right? But this makes a world of difference. So span ID, parent span ID, attributes, and links are all new. Before we had this, we did some we applied heuristics inside of the Observability Exporter. So I mean, I mentioned this, we have the start and stop events, right? We gotta pair them up into a span, right? We gotta understand what is a parent span. If we're gonna show that hierarchy that we have, which one is a parent span of something else, right? And now, in NSO 6.1, we get this data straight out of NSO, so we don't have to make any more guesswork. That means the processing pipeline inside of the Observability Exporter is now shorter. It gets to do less things, which also means that it runs faster. But above all, we get so much higher data quality. And that is just, I mean, it's the fundament of like all of the things that we're looking at now, right? So I mean, a good data quality is just so important. So shout out also to, I think Kristian Larsson did a lot of this. He's now a PO, a product owner, right? So if you bump into him here, tell him he did a good job, because I think he truly did. We stand on the shoulders of giants. And oh, right, I want to show one thing here related. So this is something that's now possible, right? Let's see if I can find this. doing something like a sync from, I did a sync from on all devices, right? When you do something like that, it used to be that we would export this as just individual sync froms, right? You wouldn't get that, you couldn't see the whole thing as one large trace. And now with the new native sort of export of this in NSO 6.1, we can. So now all of the individual sync froms here, they're joined together under one action, right? You can see here at the top, running action, and then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and that aligns with the 4 devices that we have, right? And we can see here, you know, what's actually going on in a sync from, right? We're taking a device lock, we're doing connect to the device, then we're doing show. Show is what, when you actually retrieve the configuration from the device, we do a get on a transaction ID, and then finally, once we have that configuration, we write it down into CDB, right? So this is a sync from. But the cool thing is now that you get all of this inside of one sort of uniform user interface. So I think that's really, really cool, and I'm quite excited for the future, you know, what we can do with this much improved data.
Question.
Yes?
How do we inject trace IDs from like an external system so we can correlate paths, which is, I think, a great use case?
Yes, of course it is. I'll repeat the question. How can we eject trace IDs from external systems, right? We're working on that. So there are some standards. So there's the W3C that have a standard for how you send trace. There are multiple trace-related thingies, trace IDs. It's called the trace context, right? But you also have things like baggage, they call it. So you can attach extra parameters, whatever you want to include, right? W3C has specifications for this. We're working, I can say this, right? We're working in the IETF to do the same for NetConf. So that's what I'd like to point to. That's not there right now, but we also have our proprietary commit flags, etc., right? That we can use right now. So it is possible. But I mean, I'm saying this about specification and standards because I think those really improve the situations. The proprietary commit flags that we had in NSO, for example, they are well, they're commit flags, so they're for commit operations. If you're doing something else, like you're calling an operational action, then what do you get, right? So with the standards we're working on, we want to inject and send trace IDs on any NetConf RPC, for example, right? Yeah. So, but yeah. Sorry.
How about RESTConf?
So the path forward is clear, at least W3C, I think. But since RESTConf is something that's steered by the IETF, you still have to sort of put that down somewhere in an RFC, I guess, you know that. RESTConf, HTTP, so it makes sense to use the W3C. It's not there, but... where are you? There. Exactly, but it's not with the W3C standard.
Oh, no.
Right. Exactly, yeah, right. I was actually gonna look for you, and so I didn't lie. So I'm very happy you answered immediately. Right, so I can repeat that. There are query parameters, right, they're called, in the RESTConf, which you can use to inject the trace ID. So it's there. But this is this is our proprietary stuff. But I'm just saying, it works now, but the future is even more beautiful and elegant. Yes, awesome, it is.
Kristian?
Yes, time's up.
I believe we have a question on Slido. Can we bring Slido up? Is that possible? In the last minute, if we could address perhaps parts of this.
Okay. Native integration with tracing tools like Honeycomb. I don't know. I think, as far as I am aware, Honeycomb just works with standard data. So I don't really know what that means, to be honest. Like I said, we focus on open telemetry, and I think that they accept that. I don't know what sort of. I'm not that intimately familiar with Honeycomb, so I can't answer any further actually on what you can do with the data in there. Jaeger observability package. I don't know how. Jaeger is much more proprietary, right? It has its own format. It doesn't accept open telemetry. Maybe they do now, but they haven't in the past at least. So I think if there's an integration between Honeycomb and Jaeger, it's probably Honeycomb adapting to Jaeger. So I don't think that really helps in this situation. I'm not quite sure. But Gabriel, I guess you're not here, but Are you here? Excellent. Well, we'll talk. You can tell me more about Honeycomb, and I can tell you more about that, I suppose. Part of NSO rather than external packaging? I'm not sure. I think it works fairly well as it does, actually. So, but we have.
I think it's a very important thing, like you said, it's a big leap forward in terms of observability. So I think be part of NSO.
Right. Okay. Would you be happy if it's shipped with NSO? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So, but there are no plans today, at least, to incorporate the whole shebang into NSO. So it is for the foreseeable future. I believe it's a package.
All right, Kristian, I think we have to time out there. Round of applause for Kristian. Thank you very much.
Thank you.